Hi, everybody, and welcome to a new episode of CFO Stack. Today we have with us Jason. As always, Jason, thank you very much for joining.
Happy to be here, Alex.
And we have the pleasure to have with us Dave Adams. Dave, thank you very much for joining us today.
Thank you for inviting me, Alex. I'm glad to be here.
Awesome. First of all, Dave, thank you very much. It's a pleasure having you in here. Your career in finance is incredible. Super exciting stories that you have for us for sharing today. So we would love to hear how did everything started, what made you enter in the finance world, and all the way till where we are today.
Sure, absolutely. And again, thanks. So, when I guess I'll start with college and why I went in finance initially. I think really, so I started out actually as a mechanical engineering major, and while I was great at math and science, I just really didn't enjoy it, and I ended up taking some business classes, and there was just something about it where there was almost like this puzzle element of it, where you're like trying to. It was very similar to like solving a math equation, but it was doing it with an entire business, and that just really appealed to me, and so ended up getting my degree in accounting, and then my career started with in public accounting with Price Waterhouse, and I would say kind of my career had, I'd say, four main cohorts, if you would. I mean, there was the public accounting piece. I left there and I went to eBay when it was they were actually one of my clients when the company only had 30 people, and I joined when it was about 100 people, and stayed with them till thousands of people and billions in revenue. So that was my first startup experience, and it just really instilled that desire and love for working at startups. And but post eBay, I wanted to go to a couple of other large public companies, just to get a sense of at eBay it was kind of like learning on the fly, and we got to a really huge scale and everything else, but it's just like it was kind of lots of bumps along the way, and I wanted to see some more established companies, get a sense of what things look like at scale in other places, and then come back ultimately into startups. And so post eBay, went to a couple of other large public companies, with kind of billion plus in revenue, and then about I guess 14 years ago or so, kind of jumped back into the startup space, and since then I've been mostly coming in right as the company that's hitting its growth phase, and kind of taking it to some kind of an exit, kind of as within the finance or CFO type roles. So I guess during that time, the companies I've been with have had so far I've had 3 IPOs and one that was an acquisition. So been really fortunate to have been with some great companies.
That's incredible. What made you from eBay? I guess the experience was super strong. What made you then decide to go to public traded companies instead of continue maybe like a high growth startup path?
The thing was, that's a great question. I think that because that was kind of like my first real job, and I only had one view of what a business looks like. So unless it was something else that was extremely similar, and there weren't a lot of, there was e-commerce generally, but we were very specific to obviously to auctions and everything associated with those. I just wanted to get a flavor for some other spaces, and so I worked in the communication space. I worked in some life sciences. And also, I would just say generally, I like to consider myself a lifelong learner, and so wanted exposure from things outside of just kind of high transaction e-com type stuff.
Mm-hmm. And during your period on eBay, you mentioned that you started with it was 30 people only.
Well, so they were my client. So when I was with Price Waterhouse, there was only 30 people in the company. It was. I know, like, really totally dating myself here, but like pre-Meg Whitman and everything else, where it was Pierre Midyar and Jeff Skoll, and like a very, very tiny team, and they were just growing like crazy. It was like the typical startup that you would imagine back then, where one floor or part of a floor of a small building, and on Fridays people were playing, like, they would move some of the cubicle walls and play soccer. It was very, very, very much just like the crazy fun startup. But I mean, it also had a just a right time, right place, right product, right people, and just kind of hit that perfect like 5 levels of Venn diagram that just made it a real rocket for a long time.
And then for the last couple of years, you've been involved in startups as well. So I guess that that took your attention again, right? Just playing soccer around the office.
Yeah, it's the well. That's certainly part. I mean, there's always the fun elements of it, right? I mean, the whether it's scooters around the office or whatever they kind of like morphed into over time, or ping pong or whatever the case was. But I think really, the thing that I love about startups in general is just this. There's so much like unity and like esprit de corps, whatever you want to call it, amongst the team. Like, when you get into big companies with lots of bureaucracy, it doesn't feel like everybody's trying to accomplish the same goal. And startups are so focused and so just like, us against the world, that mentality is just, it's super invigorating to work in a place like that. And then, you combine that with the elements that I love are like the building and shaping and kind of like laying that infrastructure and helping the company grow. It's just like the, perfect fit. It's, probably will do startups the rest of my life.
Yeah, I feel that way as well. Jason, what do you think?
Yeah, I agree. I think the interesting part for me with startups, and I think Dave and I have had a similar experience, but there's something about that right place when there's a new idea, there's this energy behind the team, and then you also have this essentially high transaction, high growth moment, right, where you could go into a startup and if it's really pre-growth, low transactions a bit slow, and it's probably too early to make an impact from a finance and ultimately probably a data perspective. But I also I worked for a pretty high transaction startup when I first joined in the logistics space right out of college, and I was addicted because there was just so many of these puzzle pieces that Dave you mentioned, and that really resonated with me because then it was like there was individual puzzles to solve on certain aspects of the business, and then there's the overall like how those individual pieces come together to help run the business. And as you figure it out, there's just so much value to uncover, vast amounts of data to pour over, and there is something special about going through that the first time being running across some of those new problems at a startup, even if it's repeatedly at the same startup. It's a special experience on both sides, I think.
Absolutely. Dave, you mentioned 4 different cohorts or phases in your career.
Yep.
Are they industry agnostic? Have you been focusing especially in certain type of business?
Yep. Yeah. So I would say, I mean, the 4 cohorts are the kind of what I mentioned. I would say there's the public accounting piece, and I mean obviously that was exposure to mostly still things within the technology space, but across a variety of technologies. eBay I would have as like a standalone because it was so markedly different. And then the third one would be like other large companies, and then the fourth is the one I'm in now, which is just the other startups. And I have been in a variety of, like I said, of industries, but I would say, I mean, obviously all of them in the technology space, but a combination of software, hardware, services, high volume. I've also been in lower volume, high contract companies, pre-revenue, life science companies. I mean, you name it. I've had kind of some exposure to lots of them.
Great. In your experience, what it's been more challenging at these companies, building the team or building the tech stack?
So both have their challenges, and I think maybe it'd be helpful if I like talk a little bit about like my team building versus technology philosophy. And I would say that at any startup that I'm at, and it could be one that's whether it's high transaction volume or not. I'm really focused on trying to build a lean, efficient team for a couple of different reasons. And the first is just that I want to instill a instill and demonstrate a culture of fiscal responsibility. It's really tough for me to get buy-in from the rest of the organization if they see me over, empire building, in finance. And second, I want to create kind of a manageable level of pressure on the team that really highlights where issues or inefficiencies exist. I think it's an easy answer to just, if something is expecting to take hours and is taking days, to throw more bodies at it and can kind of think about it later. I like to keep that pressure on it so you can find those areas. I mean, basically that pressure focuses where I need to start doing those improvements, and it could come through better process, it could come through better systems, or it could come through additional people. I mean, there are limits to what people can actually get done, even with great systems and great processes. And so really, I, again, try to keep that lean first. Identify where there's inefficiency, and drill in your focus there. And then obviously, like purely from like a technology perspective, I normally, with startups, I would say I look at, if I'm balancing technology investments versus people, I kind of think about it as a grid with a couple of matrices axes, and one is kind of like is volume, and the other is kind of like the relative risk or importance of the problem you're trying to solve, right? Granted, like all startups are going to be focused on revenue and all the associated stuff, bookings, billings, deferred, what have you, and cash. But when there's a combination of, say, high volume and revenue, that's where I want to get a system in place early on, right? I mean, in contrast to, say, accounts payable, right? I'll have that outsourced a lot of times at a startup because while costs are incredibly important and I want to know what's going on there, I also know that 70% of my cost is probably coming from my headcount. And while there could be a lot of volume and process around the AP side, there's just not a lot of like risk associated with it. So that would get on a second tier of kind of like system implementation. So yeah, if it's in that quadrant of like high importance and high volume, that's where I really try to get a system in place first, because if it is tens of thousands of transactions or millions of transactions that are going on, if there's a small error multiplied by tens of thousands or millions, it becomes a big error really fast. And so if you have that, and normally I would say that a high volume business is one where it's repeatable, right? So you can get rules around it, and that lends itself to something that gets systematized versus having a very complex, large, multi-element contract or something like that. You only have 10 customers a quarter, or whatever the case is.
Mm-hmm. Jason,
yeah, I think you nailed that too. You mentioned the risk piece, which I think is an element of the matrix that you're kind of visualizing. You definitely have volume, and then you kind of mentioned importance, and I think that's the key, because then that covers a little bit of the risk, the value of solving some of those bits. And I think you can almost contrast this against like two types of businesses in some sense, right? Where you have the we'll call it old school, but not really old school, but more of a control first mentality, a de-risk mentality. They probably exist with an ERP. Their operations are controlled and contained within an ERP, and they may have lots of complexity across their contracts, but they're very rigid in their data model. Then, I think about what you're mentioning, which is really these innovated, more high transaction companies where control is almost secondary to innovation and growth. And then that puts you in an interesting position leading finance, because now you're going, well, that's the first place I need to invest from a tech perspective, because I need to make sure that I can understand, the trade-offs of that innovation and, at the very least have an understanding to be a business partner. And I think that's exactly right in my experience. I've been a part of both of those. I've been a part of, construction and high transaction businesses alike. And, I think that line of like control versus innovation, depending on who's winning and how the system is set up, really is how you think about how you want to run finance. That almost guides you to that decision in some sense.
Right. It's especially, like you're saying, important on the high volume side to have I mean, if possible, access to the best real-time data as possible, right? You don't want to get to the end of the month and then realize you're off, right? You need to have those indicators on, and again, normally revenue is revenue or the cash associated with billings or whatever the case is are going to be some of the most important elements of what's going on. And the sooner you realize you're starting to get off track, you can start making adjustments. And so that's something that's certainly changed over time, right? I would say that more the older system or older mindset was kind of you'll figure it all out at the end of the month, whereas now it's kind of much more real time and having, and that's impossible if you don't have a system in place, right? That's something you can't manually horsepower through in any kind of reasonable manner. You've got to get systems in place for it.
Yeah, I like it. And I agree. I think those are the exact trade-offs. One quick follow-up on that thread, and you touched on this a little bit in terms of keeping your team lean, but I'd love to drill in terms of like how you balance the technology investment against team building. And I think you touched on this a little bit in terms of keeping the team lean, and it sounded like there's a mechanism there where if you overhire or you lean into every problem with hiring, then it ends up kind of masking maybe some of these opportunities for automation. And I'd love to double click onto that and terrible cliche, but I'd love to hear more.
Yeah, I mean, so that's certainly more art than science. I think that depending on when you're at the startup, you're going to go through different phases. Again, throughout the whole time, I'm trying to keep the team lean and identify where those areas are. And normally at the beginning at least, it's a very small team, and I'm kind of partnering with the people on my team to help understand kind of what the base level issue is and kind of help them brainstorm on what we should have as the solution. A lot of times too, like I'll know what the answer is, but I want them to go through the process because the thinking part is more important ultimately. And so what I'll try to do generally is, like I said, get some of those systems in place early, get that infrastructure in place early, where a couple of things are. One, like I said, if it's in the kind of like important / volume, quadrant of the matrix. And I would say that, important also though, is at least having enough stability in the company to be able to systematize it. I've been in situations also where there's kind of like so much chaos there. You have to spend a lot of time figuring out what rules to apply to actually get it into a system first. And that could include a lot, historical cleanup or and resetting some expectations along the way. But try to go system first on those, and then on the team side, really, that really is where the art is because just as the organization grows. I mean, when I'm trying to find people on the team initially, right, I'm trying to find really, really bright people with a lot of like energy and enthusiasm that are just going to help try to figure stuff out, right? They've got this kind of this solution mindset, and they're gonna figure things out, and over time, and as the volume increases and as the business gets bigger, one or two things is going to happen. They're going to become too general and not good enough in anything to be able to continue on, and oftentimes they'll find something else in the organization. They could end up outside the organization, or sometimes they just totally rise and they start hiring in specialists underneath them, and start doing some of the more granular, more focused, less less breadth. And so it really depends a lot on the individual and kind of like what their ability to grow is over time. I don't know if I answered your question exactly.
Yeah, I think so. Yeah, and I want to go just one more level potentially, but
sure.
When you think about that, right? Like a lot of folks generalize a finance team, and obviously, as having built many of these, but there's FP&A, there's financial operations, there's accounting. How do you think about those maybe differently than the team as a whole when it comes to those same principles around hiring and technology? And I think you had a good example of that earlier around accounts payable, and you outsource that. Yeah. It's relatively easy to control. It's low risk, even if it is high volume. But I'd love to hear more kind of about the other aspects of accounting, both from a financial accounting perspective, also management, and then an FP&A, and any that I
Yep.
missed, frankly.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, so like, I say first of all, like at the very at the very base, right? I always think of when I say finance, I mean the entire organization. I don't mean just like the FP&A team. And so, like, if I was to think of, normally what I would see is, kind of like the FP&A, the finance, the financial operations. Sometimes it's revenue operations. Sometimes it has different titles. And very broadly, right, I would say that FP&A is the future and accounting is the past, and FinOps is often the kind of like that bridge between a lot of normally they're very, system savvy people that are also the bridge between like finance and other internal departments, or sometimes with our customers as well. And when it comes to investments in those, so I'll kind of like tack them in. FP&A is one of the last ones I normally would get a system in place for. Right? It's easy enough to do on, I hate to say it, but spreadsheets for a long time, and especially when the business is pivoting a lot. Right? Things are changing here. You literally can't get that stuff into a system in any reasonable fashion. I would say once you have the maturity to where the business is relatively understood. I would say, not necessarily relative. Once the business is understood, you're in good growth, and you're getting to the point where the company is becoming sophisticated enough to start needing department budgets and people that are and like actual people in the company that are managing those budgets. They need to have a tool that they can interact with finance through, so they know how they're performing. So systems would be one of the latter pieces I have in there, but a really good finance person and a spreadsheet can go a long ways. Accounting, I would say that I'm gonna say accounting is separate from financial operations, because I would say financial operations to me would be like, they would be the ones that would be owning the, let's say, the high volume invoicing / revenue system that's kind of like a sub ledger into accounting, and their role is going to be partnering with sales to make sure, on deals desk, whatever the case is, that all the stuff is coming in, or partnering with engineering to make sure that everything that's happening on the engineering side is flowing into this thing and is invoiced correctly, and what's happening, like they're partnering a lot with the business, and their entire job is associated with this a good system being in place. So I would say there you're gonna have technology investment, earlier on. And then accounting, and I don't mean to put them last for, because they're least important or anything like that. It's just they happen to be the last one, talking through. I mean, ultimately, they're the ERP, or even if it, whether it's QuickBooks or not, I mean, that's something that every company has to have like straight out the gate. I mean, you cannot operate a business with the spreadsheets. You have to have something in place, and there it's a real, I would say. There's some mid-tier products that last a long time, and I look at them more as like the receptacle, for catching all the stuff that's happened, so that you can do your reporting, right? I mean, the finance team and the FinOps team are going to be looking at stuff that's happening on a daily basis and projecting, what to do with that. And then at the very end, accounting is going to do their little, tweaks if any are necessary, and kind of report the final numbers. And so they need to have that base level piece in place, and then it can last a long time, I would say, until it gets to the, until you have a lot more complexity in the business.
Yeah, complexity, a bunch of covenants, maybe some IPOs, and you've got 16 versions of financial statements. You may need a system just to manage financial reporting.
Well, yeah, I mean, especially if you start doing, anytime where like consolidation really comes into play, or other international entities, I mean, that's normally where it's like, I have to do something a little bit more here, and start looking a little bit beyond QuickBooks.
Great. Dave, I'm curious to learn what your thoughts are on the impact of AI in these different three areas. So if you will imagine a world in the next 3-5 years, how does AI impact in accounting, FinOps, and FP&A?
So I think the most immediate impact is going to be really on those high volume, the high volume stuff, right? any any element of the business. So I could see a number of things on on the accounting side where I'll go back to AP because that's the very simple one, or what's happening from like a cash banking, anything where there's like a tremendous amount of data that it can capture and analyze and help guide decisions on. So I think of it as being like a system enhancer that makes it even more efficient, right? So if I go back to my base and say, I try to make our systems as maximally efficient so that we have less, ultimately have less headcount. I think AI just it enhances that. So ultimately, I think the finance teams will get leaner, and it'll probably the pieces that'll probably get most impacted would be I would say less judgment, high volume, similar type transaction. People that are focused on that are going to get squeezed by AI.
Dave has never had a team over 3 people, so you can't ask him. I'm kidding.
No. Yeah, actually, I mean, so I think that it's going to be interesting, right? Because I mean, my immediate bias is to say yes, it'll probably be smaller teams. But the flip side of that is if you still have like if there's a budget and now you can just invest more of that budget into things that are really adding additional value on top of what the kind of like base level processing is doing, you may end up with the same size team, but just with a lot more value creation. And so I'm not sure where that balance is going to be yet. I think that the systems will be more efficient, and maybe that frees up more time so that the team size doesn't change, but they can just be add value to the company in other ways.
Yeah, and I'll add 2 cents real quickly here. I think in this instance it's probably very useful to bifurcate automation from AI and large language models. And ultimately, yeah, I agree with you, Dave. I think it's like in the short term, it's kind of a question mark as to like how. And if you were going to pick between making finance and accounting more efficient using AI or delivering value in some way, even if it's with some of your financial data, you're probably going to pick the more offensive approach.
Yep, absolutely.
But I think the one blocker that's probably true for finance and accounting more so than any other group for AI is those models require clear associations. So if you have a bunch of disparate data from a bunch of payments and invoices and contracts and performance, and there isn't clear associations, and that's done by your accounting group and folks didn't invest in some of those FinOps like Dave, then I don't think they're going to be able to reap the benefit, at least from the financial analysis perspective, of being able to pull out those insights and take advantage of the large learning models. So that's I think part of the distinction is you're probably going to see probably the Dave teams of the world that will reap the benefit on both the automation because they were already going there, and then AI, and then you'll see the other folks going, well, how do I even use AI? Because they don't have an association to their data. They haven't really automated like how to think about how their business, emits transactions and financial records along the way, and they're stuck going, yeah, the best I can do is, upload after my month end close, so ChatGPT tells me, where we're making money and losing money, which they probably already knew.
Yeah, well said. Well said.
I think Dave's right. It'll just get more efficient, and in the short term, I think those are efficiencies you're probably not going to feel or see at an organizational level. They'll probably help individuals. And then on a longer term time scale, as we solve those association problems, I think it'll be much more useful to apply some of those models to uncovering opportunities for margin improvement and improving revenue leakage. But it feels like we're a couple steps away from having it be an organizational wide efficiency benefit.
Excellent. Thank you. Thanks, Alex. Really appreciate you inviting me, and that was a lot of fun.
Take care, gents.